All right, good morning, class. We're going to be talking about the age of revolutions. First, we're going to analyze the age of revolutions. We're going to identify the causes and results of the revolutions in England, United States, France, Haiti, and Latin America. This is day 2 of the revolutions, and we will be talking about France, Haiti, and Latin America. French Revolution, we're going to identify the causes and results of the revolutions from France, Haiti, and Latin America. This is the French Revolution. All right, this is France. And this is where we are located, right here in southeast of the United States in Savannah, Georgia. Tell of two cities. It was the best of times, it's the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. It was written by Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was an author during the time of the French Revolution. All right, the French Revolution. It marked the end of Europe's old order of a world dominated by rich aristocrats. It was the beginning of a new order valuing equality, representative government, individual rights, and nationalism. Nationalism is the pride in one's nation. It occurred over the course of a decade. It came in a number of stages. The old regime, it was a social political system in France during the 1770s, placing people in 3 social classes. Those classes were called estates. So the estates were 3 social classes of France's old regime. The first estate was of the Catholic clergy. Those are the bishops, priests, and the people that were involved in the church. It made up 1% of the population. They owned 10% of the land, and they paid few taxes. The second state was rich nobles, aristocrats. They made up 2% of the population. They owned 20% of the land, and they paid no taxes. They occupied many other nations' positions. They occupied many other nations' positions of leadership and influence. The third estate, it was made up of peasants, urban workers, middle class, the bourgeoisie, which is where the common name bougie comes from. It made up 97% of the population. They paid heavy taxes, but they also had no voice in the government, but they were eager for change. The bourgeoisie, it consisted of bankers, merchants, lawyers. These were the people that made all the money in the country, all the money in the nation. They were the reason why the country was thriving. Many members of the bourgeoisie supported the political ideas of the Enlightenment, and they wanted to reform the French monarchy along with many of the nobility. Review. What was the name of the social political system in France that divided people into 3 social classes? The old regime. All right, which estate had no voice in government but paid almost all the taxes? The third estate. All right, we'll talk about the National Assembly. It happened in the late 1780s. It was inspired by Rousseau and the American Revolution. It happened during economic hardship, food shortages, discontent over the nation's tax system and land policies. It was the near financial. It happened when it was up to the near financial collapse of the government. King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette was in charge at this time. King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette lived extravagantly. The debt doubled while they were in charge. The banks refused to lend more money. It forced King Louis to call an assembly of France's legislative body in 1789. This legislative assembly had not met for over 150 years. During this assembly, each estate was represented. Review. What philosophy and revolution encouraged the French people to seek change? Rousseau and the American Revolution. While Louis and Marie lived a life of luxury, what type of problem was the third estate facing? Economic problems, food shortages, no voices, heavy taxes. Why did the third estate believe that the medieval rules of the estate general were unfair? Because they had no voice. They had no say-so in the government at all. All right, the National Assembly. Members of the third estate quickly seized control and called themselves the National Assembly. They made a tennis court oath. The tennis court oath was in Versailles. What they did on this tennis court was they came together and they vowed that whatever happened, we were going to stick together. Whatever happened, we would not be divided by anybody. We got one goal, and that is to remove the king from power. So they drew up a new constitution. And the king threatened to use force to put down this assembly. So after rumors that Louis would use the military against the National Assembly, an angry mob stormed the prison armory known as the Bastille. The mob cut off the head of the garrison leader, the person that was in charge of that army, and marched it through the streets of Paris. So this angry mob went in and beheaded a guy that probably had nothing to do with their problems and marched his head through the streets of Paris. So there were peasant uprisings that filled the French countryside. Women peasants found out about what was going on at Bastille, and they took Louis and Marie Antoinette from Versailles to Paris. So on 14 July, the French seized this as Independence Day, similar to the United States Independence Day on July the 4th. This is a picture of the French mob, the angry mob, storming the Bastille. Review. What was the National Assembly's primary goal? To remove the monarchy. Explain the tennis court oath. It was a group of people, the National Assembly, that got together and decided that we're going to stick together. And whatever happens, happens. We're gonna all fall on the blade together. Why did the peasants storm the Bastille? They found out that the king was sending soldiers to destroy them, to kill them. All right, the Assembly reforms France. The Assembly wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Man. All men are born free and entitled to equal rights. It took the church lands and made clergy elected officials. And it offended many peasants. The reason why it offended these peasants is that the clergy were in charge already. They made up 1% of the population. And they already had lands that could have went to the 97% of the country. But instead of allowing the 97% to have a say and be elected as elected officials, the assembly made the clergy the elected officials once again. So in 1791, the royal family attempted to escape to Austria. It was found out, and they were captured and sent back to to Paris. As you can see, Louis and Marie Antoinette captured, sent back to Paris. The Constitution of 1791 replaced the old order of French government with a limited monarchy. It took most of the power away from the king. Legislative Assembly now had power in France. So the Legislative Assembly is now in control. What French document stated that men are born free and are entitled to equal rights? The Declaration of the Rights of Men. What action did the National Assembly take that offended many peasants? It made clergy elected officials and gave them land. After Louis had limits put on his power, what group gained control of France? The Legislative Assembly. Now the immigrants were nobles, and they had fled France during this revolution. They hoped to end the revolution and restore the old regime. Sans-culottes, workers who wanted radical changes. So the immigrants wanted to restore the king's leadership. They wanted the king to be back in charge. The sans-culottes wanted the people to have a say. Other European nations grew alarmed. They were afraid. Foreign kings feared that because of the French Revolution, it would give their citizens the spirit to spread to their country. They would give their spirit for them to come up and form a revolution against their own people. So France found itself at war with many of its European neighbors. Now, in the summer of 1792, Austria and Prussia urged France to restore the king's power. They said, if you don't restore the king, we're going to come in and we're going to invade you. And we're going to appoint our own king in your territory, into your country. So France declared war. And the Prussian officer threatened to destroy Paris, which was the capital of France at the time. So early military defeats and continued economic hardships led to another change in government. A radical mob stormed the royal palace, and they took the king captive. And they forced the assembly to suspend, to get rid of the French monarchy. Review. Why did other European countries wish to restore the king's power? Because they were afraid. They were afraid that revolution would give their people confidence to step up and take control of their country. What is the difference between an immigrant and a sans-culotte? The immigrant wanted the monarchy back. The sans-culotte wanted radical changes. Why did the French people imprison Louis and his family? Because he tried to escape and go into Austria. The new National Convention took charge. They abolished the monarchy, and they executed the King of France on January 21st, 1793. You can see that this picture depicts that this guy is holding the head of King Louis XVI. The Committee of Public Safety. Many Frenchmen felt that such actions were too drastic and refused to support the National Convention. Other European nations were appalled by the king's execution and prepared to invade France. So the National Convention empowered a group called the Committee of Public Safety just to deal with this crisis. So here comes the Jacobins. The Jacobins were a party of radicals. They were under the leadership of Maximilien Robespierre, and they took control of the Committee of Public Safety. So the foreign enemies were afraid now because Robespierre quickly raised an army of well over 1 million Frenchmen, and he pushed back France's foreign enemies. All of this calls for a rise of nationalism, which is a pride in one's country. Now, they also have enemies inside of France, just like anywhere else. You got enemies outside your country and enemies inside. So during this time, they launched a period known as a reign of terror. The state executed thousands of French citizens on the guillotine, which was a contraption that cut off people's heads. It ended when a rival group seized control of the National Convention, and they executed Robespierre in July of 1794. Review. What radical group supported a Republican type of government and had the king executed? The Jacobins. Who was targeted during the Reign of Terror? French citizens. Why did the National Convention turn on Robespierre? Because he became too powerful. The Directory. A new constitution passed power to 5 directors in 1795. This was known as the Directory. The period was riddled with corruption and political rivalries between royalists who wanted to return to the monarchy and radicals who were still enraged by ongoing economic problems. It looked to the army to maintain its position of power. So in 1799, one of the army's most popular generals, Napoleon Bonaparte, took advantage of this situation and seized power. And he eventually declared himself the Emperor of France. So Napoleon was an opportunist. He decided, okay, y'all want to fight amongst each other? I am in control of the army. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to appoint myself emperor of this country. And you know why? Because I have the army. I have the power. All right, next, we talk about the Haitian Independence. The element is to identify the causes and results of the Haitian Independence. And the essential question is, how did the revolution in the Americas impact the world? All right, you are here, right here, Savannah, Georgia, Southeast United States. Haiti, right here, the Caribbean islands. Now, we have studied before about the transatlantic slave trade. And we know that a lot of the ships that transported slaves across the Atlantic Ocean stopped right here in the Caribbean. And a lot of them went to the country of Haiti. So the cause of the Haitian Revolution. The revolution in France soon spread upon its colonies. Something that European kings were afraid of. It started happening. Saint Dominique was a colony of France. So in 1791, black slaves rebelled against their white masters after learning of the revolution in Europe. Toussaint L'Ouverture was a gifted and educated slave. He quickly became a leader of the enraged slaves in Saint Dominique. He continually claimed to be a Frenchman, acting in the spirit of the French Revolution. And he proclaimed himself the ruler, and he freed all the slaves. The result of the Haitian Revolution was that the French troops arrived in 1802. And Toussaint was detained, he was deceived, and he was taken prisoner. He died soon after he was captured in a French dungeon. But his followers did not give up the fight. They continued to fight in Saint Dominique. So they had successfully turned back the French, and they established the new nation of Haiti. All right, revolutions in Latin America. Identify the causes and the results of the revolutions in Latin America. All right, you're here. Southeast United States, Savannah, Georgia. This is Latin America. It consists of Venezuela, Latin America, as far as South America, Brazil, all that good stuff, Colombia. All right, the description of the revolution in Latin America is a number of successful Latin American revolutions occurred during the first quarter of the 19th century. The Creoles were people of European descent who were born and lived in the American colonies. You know, you heard of Creole. Most of the times that you heard of a Creole is in Louisiana. Now, during this time also, the Haiti immigrants were escaping from Haiti, and they were all forming down in Louisiana. And most of the Creoles was leaving Latin America, going to Louisiana. The causes of the Latin American Revolution, it happened during the early 1800s. The Creoles began to feel a great deal of discontent towards Spain and Portugal. So they resented what they saw as unfair economic policies. Same thing that happened in the United States. The United States were upset that they were being told to do things and didn't have a representation in the parliament. So the Latin American, they decided that they want to fight back. And it was all inspired by the United States' success in the American Revolution. Jose de San Martin, he was in power by 1810. And he led forces that expelled the Spanish from Argentina. He believed that all of South America must be free of Spain's rule. So he crossed the Andes Mountains to surprise the Spanish. And he defeated the Spanish at the Battle of Chacabuco in 1817. South America, right here, and this is Argentina. Makes up over 35% of the continent. Simon Bolivar, he was liberated in Venezuela. He liberated Venezuela and Colombia and Ecuador. He joined forces with Martin, and they finished together driving the Spanish out of South America. Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador. Other independent movements. Mexico declared independence in 1821. By 1823, Central America was free. Eventually, it was divided into 5 republics. And in 1822, Brazil declared independence from Portugal. So the U.S. President James Monroe issued his doctrine called the Monroe Doctrine. He is concerned that European nations might act to reinstate their authority over their colonies. So the Monroe Doctrine warned all the European powers. And he warned them that there would be no new colonies in America, South America or North America. And if they decided to attack, the U.S. would respond to any European attack. Now, during this time, the United States was new. It was a new country. It had been a country more than 50 years, less than 50 years. So the impact of this doctrine was that the U.S. was not very powerful to deter European action. So Great Britain also wanted Latin American nations free so that the Latin Americans could engage in trade with England. So the Britain's Navy shielded the new Latin American nations from the threat of European invasion. So this guaranteed the independence of the new Latin American nations. This completes my presentation. Do we have any questions? All right, thank you.